Michael, good morning.
Good morning. I have a question for you, unrelated to what we were supposed to talk about, based on a conversation that just happened in the hallway. So you know how you have cloakroom conversations with Tom Cotton and Rand Paul. I have conversations with former NFL quarterback Sean Salisbury, and I want to ask you a question based on that. You ready?
All right.
Put your thinking hat on, because I know you were a student of the game. So Salisbury played in Minnesota, star quarterback at USC. He knows I'm a Dan Fouts fan, San Diego Chargers quarterback, as is he. But I said, who was the best under center quarterback, not shotgun, under center quarterback, drop back passer that you ever saw on a football field with your own two eyes? And the quarterback, he told me, surprisingly, never played in the shotgun. Who do you think that was? Think 80s, 90s.
No clue. You got me.
Joe Montana. And he said...
Is he not playing them? Look, I would have put Montana as one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. I just remember him connecting to Jerry Rice ridiculously.
There you go, Dwight
But
Clark.
did he not play in the shotgun?
He said you will never find video of Joe Montana in San Fran, which makes me think maybe in Kansas City he did, because Sean's a student of the game. He said you will never find video of Joe Montana in the shotgun in a 49ers uniform. I said, you know what, now that you mention it, he was a drop-back passer. You think of Favre always in the shotgun? You think of Joe Montana always drop-back. How are you?
I'm doing great. You know, the best quarterback I ever saw play in person did not do much in the NFL either, but was Vince Young in the Texas USC national championship.
That 2006? That 2006, I was watching on YouTube. There's so much good stuff on YouTube, and it was 10 best college performances of all time. And I kept thinking, well, how are you not going to have Vince Young? How you not? And it got higher. Number one, Vince Young.
When I'll tell you something that you'll laugh at. That was the first football game Heidi had ever been to in her life. She's a California girl, was not raised on football, and we went out. I brought her. We went with a couple other couples to the game. And, you know, Heidi's from California. She has close friends that live in Pasadena. And she said she was going to wear USC red. And I told her, I said, sweetheart, I love you, but we're going to throw you out of the truck. Like that is not an acceptable, and it may be in now, 19 years of marriage, it may be the only argument I've ever won in our marriage. Because she decided she didn't care all that much, and I dressed her in burnt orange from head to toe. And you know, she's in the middle of the game, and I remember she turns to me and goes, that Vince Young guy, he's really good. I'm like, yeah, he's all right.
You know, that game was such a special moment. I don't know if you remember, but A&M fans, Aggie fans, the biggest rivalry they have is the University of Texas, and people, they had shirts made where the saw 'em off horns, they taped them back on, and it was like, you know what, if Texans are going to win this, if we're going to have a shot at this, if we got to root for you, I mean, that was how you knew this was a serious moment. What a good... You know, I was looking this weekend. I went off into a Vince Young trail now that you mention it, and I think of him as having a terrible pro career. He didn't live up to what people may have wanted. He was Rookie of the Year. I think he was a 2-time Pro Bowl. He did... His first 3 seasons for Tennessee were actually pretty solid.
All right, so let me ask this question. What the hell was Jim Carroll thinking, leaving Reggie Bush on the side? What was Jim Carroll thinking, leaving Reggie Bush on the sidelines for the last offensive play of the game for them for the 4th down?
Well, if you remember, Pete Carroll had that big running back who he played in the pros. I can't remember, but Reggie was the little guy, number 4, and it wasn't Lorenzo White. What was the guy's name?
It was it may have been something White. I remember he was a big guy.
Yeah, he was probably 250. He was kind of a Lydell Mitchell size or Lindell White. It was Lindell White. And so, you know, I don't know. If they just punt, you got to think. But Pete Carroll was scared to death of giving Vince Young the ball again, and you see why. I don't know how many times you've seen it, but I have gone back and watched that. They play it. Occasionally it'll be on SportsCenter, and wherever it is, it's like a Blues Brothers movie. Wherever it is, I got to go back and watch it just one more time. Were you at that game?
I was at that game. We had great seats. And I actually went the next year when it was Texas-Alabama in the Rose Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And that one, Heidi didn't want to go, the friends who went. And so I just said, you know what? If Texas wins again and I'm not there, I'll be pissed.
Yep.
And so I got on a plane. I flew out there. I didn't have tickets. I talked to Heidi the morning of the game. I was staying with her friends that lived about a mile from the Rose Bowl. And she's like, do you have tickets? I said, no. I said, I had some cash in my pocket. I said, I'm just going to walk down and find a scalper and buy a ticket. And as you walk down, if you ever done that, as you get closer and closer to kickoff, the balance of power shifts.
Yes.
And these scalpers, look, this ticket that's worth thousands of dollars in another half hour is going to be a piece of cardboard.
Right.
And so, probably 20 minutes before kickoff, I ended up buying just one ticket on the 40-yard line, about 10 rows back, and I paid face value for it. And Heidi's like, well, what happens if you can't find a ticket? I said, if I can't find a ticket, I'll go to a sports bar and watch the game on TV. That's not the end of the world. But I'm betting I will. And I went in, and the tickets were amazing because it was right before kickoff. But there were literally Texas billionaires who were sitting 5 and 10 rows behind me that they did not pay face value for the tickets.
That's the game. Remember Colt had a stinger in his arm? And his dad took him into the locker room, and he tried to throw, and they say he couldn't even lift his arm up. And by the next morning, he could throw again. And he's literally weeping. And that kid comes in who's a freshman and actually starts off the game pretty strong. Was it Marty? What was that kid's name? It's a alliterative name, like Marty Miller or whatever. He was also a punter. Hold on just a second, Senator Ted Cruz is our guest. Senator Ted Cruz is our guest. We're talking during the break, which we'll play for you when we're done with the conversation, about what steps can be taken to restore America's energy sector. Because, as noted, the Saudis and the Russians want to push the Texans out of the industry, and at this point, they're well on their way. So, Senator, what can we do? Sure.
I think there are a number of things. One is press very, very hard on the Saudis and the Russians. I can tell you 3-4 weeks ago, I joined with 12 other senators. We wrote a letter to the Saudi ambassador blasting Saudi Arabia for slashing prices and trying to destroy Texas energy companies. We then did a call with a total of 9 senators with the Saudi ambassador that I got to tell you was as raw and bare knuckled as any conversation. It was unlike any conversation I've had with a foreign leader since my time in the Senate. I mean, we pounded the hell out of her. And it was quite simply what they're doing is they are taking advantage of this public health crisis to try to bankrupt Texas shale producers. And their defense is, well, but Russia. And I tell you my response, I said, look, Russia's our enemy. They behave like our enemy. We treat them like our enemy. We understand that. You're supposed to be our damn friend. And what you're doing now is waging economic warfare against jobs in Texas and in the United States. And if you're going to behave like an enemy, you can damn sure expect to be treated like an enemy. I will say coming out of that meeting, I think the message was heard loud and clear. When I was in D.C. on Friday meeting with the president at the White House and the other energy leaders, he relayed, as you know, he's had conversations with both Putin and MBS, and they have committed to him to a global reduction in output of between 10 and 15 million barrels a day. Nationally, globally, demand for oil has historically been between 95 and 100 million barrels a day. So they're reducing output 10 to 15. That helps, and it's what took oil prices from $20 a barrel up to about 27. The other big challenge, though, in energy, even if we get the Saudis and the Russians to stop screwing with us, The broader challenge is with the coronavirus shutdown, we've seen a demand destruction of between 25 and 30 million barrels a day. It simply put, people are not driving their cars and they're not flying jet airplanes. And gasoline and especially airplane fuel are a huge component of the typical demand. And until people get back in their cars and start flying their planes, the energy markets are a disaster. That we will fix in time. When we defeat this pandemic, which we're going to go back to work. We're going to get back to driving cars. We're going to get back to getting on airplanes. And that means demand will come back. We don't know when, if it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks. We don't know how long it's going to be. But it's going to happen. What I'm focused very aggressively on in the interim is access to capital. And this is a concern I raised with the president. I've been having meetings round the clock on, is making sure that banks are willing to loan money to these energy companies so that they can have essentially bridge loans to survive. What I don't want to see is the independent producers, the moms and pops. If you up to the Permian Basin in Midland, Odessa, you get all these small producers that are out driving innovation, driving jobs. And I want to make sure that we don't see the financial sector discriminating against energy and cutting them off from capital and bankrupting them. And the most significant deliverable that came out of the meeting with the president is the president directed Dan Brouillette, the energy secretary, to work with Steven Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, to make sure that banks are not discriminating against energy companies, that they're allowing them access to capital. And that's really the approach of Congress through this crisis, is ensuring liquidity, ensuring that people can get bridge loans to survive the economic crisis and still be viable on the other side.
Senator Ted Cruz is our guest. You and I have had this conversation off air. Nobody wants to be the guy who doesn't take the coronavirus seriously enough or close down enough things. But I know that you understand that there is a great concern that maybe there's not enough focus on getting the economy back going because doctors are making public policy. How do we ensure that we're not overreacting or killing off industries that can't come back? How do we ensure, and the president's even talking about a new task force potentially to get the economy going again?
So it is an incredibly hard question and a hard challenge. Michael, as you know, there's a school of economic analysis called public choice theory that analyzes how decisions are made in a democratic situation. And one of the consistent features of decision making is that people tend to much more highly value immediate and visible harms and benefits than they value delayed and slightly less visible harms or benefits. Even if the latter are bigger than the former, they tend to value the immediate and the visible. I think our priority needs to be protecting human life, keeping people safe, keeping people alive. It is clear that the coronavirus is a threat to human life, that we have seen deaths in Texas, in the United States. We've seen deaths worldwide, and we need to be acting vigorously to prevent those deaths. At the same time, if we go through weeks and weeks or even months of an economic shutdown, of everyone sheltering in place, of nobody going out to businesses, we know to an absolute fact that deaths will result from that as well. That if we keep doing this, we're going to see more and more small businesses go bankrupt. We're going to see restaurants and bars and bowling alleys and movie theaters and hair salons and hardware stores going out of business. We've already seen over 10 million people lose their jobs. And when you have massive economic devastation, when you have poverty, that increases death. It leads to depression. It leads to mental health issues. It can lead to substance abuse. It can lead to suicide. And going down a road where millions and millions of people are seeing their entire livelihood, seeing their life's work destroyed, that's going to have consequences in human life as well. So we've got to balance those. We've got to weigh them. I'm not saying one needs to dominate over the other, but we need to consider both. And I hope we get back to work soon, but we'll get back to work once we see the numbers coming down and once we get this pandemic under control. That's when we're going to be able to talk about getting people back to work to get the economy in recovery and roaring again.
Senator Ted Cruz is our guest. I know you got to go, but I want to ask you one question, which if you can give me a minute off air. You've talked very tough about China, and in fact, you've kind of been leading the charge on that, and I just want to get your thoughts on that if you'll give me 1 minute.
Sure.
Senator Ted Cruz is our guest. Senator, you have been out front, very aggressive, to use your term, with regard to China and their role in all of this. And in fact, last week, talking about potentially the facility where this virus came from and its proximity to the wet market and those sorts of things. Talk about that if you would, because there don't seem to be a lot of people in public life willing to take the stand you have.
Well, China's conduct has played a major role in the spread of this global pandemic. Number one, when the outbreak occurred in Wuhan, China, the Chinese Communist Party did everything they possibly could to cover it up. They suppressed news coverage. They didn't bring in scientists. They didn't bring in medical doctors. They didn't bring in an epidemic containment unit. Instead, they punished the doctors who spoke out about it. They went after them and they tried to just silence it. And as a consequence, we saw this epidemic spread and become a pandemic. And China behaved like a responsible government. This crisis could have been averted. It could potentially have been contained to the region where the outbreak occurred. But for months, they denied it, they suppressed it. And by the way, the World Health Organization acted as a puppet and a mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist government, insisting the coronavirus had no risk of human-to-human transmission. This is earlier this year. This is recent. While the outbreak is growing, the World Health Organization was helping China spread that propaganda. Many of the deaths we have seen worldwide are a direct consequence of the Chinese cover-up. Number two, there needs to be real and serious inquiry after we defeat this pandemic, after we stop the immediate public health crisis, as to how it started, where this virus came from. And within miles of the animal market, the wet market, where this outbreak is believed to have originated, within miles, there are not one, there are two Chinese labs that are researching coronaviruses from bats. And there is a natural inference, a natural question that needs to be asked, which is, did this virus accidentally escape from one of those labs? Now, there's some folks on the internet that are putting out elaborate theories that this was a bioweapon that the Chinese released. I don't find that very plausible. Not many governments, even communist governments, are in the habit of developing weapons and just releasing it on their own citizens willy-nilly. It's not necessarily impossible, but it's highly, highly unlikely. What is much more likely is that this was a virus that occurred naturally, not that was created in a lab, but that they were studying and that their safety protocols were shoddy. And in fact, there's been quite a bit of coverage that one of the labs, the P4, the highest level lab, that their safety protocols were substandard. And what there's a real possibility of is that it accidentally escaped, that somebody accidentally got infected. They're studying the virus and they accidentally got bitten or scratched or somehow got the virus, and then they took it out and inadvertently caused the outbreak. And I got to say, that would explain a lot of the Chinese government's panicked efforts to cover this up. And nobody in the mainstream media wants to ask these questions. Let's start with a very simple question. These two labs within miles of where the outbreak started, were they studying the novel coronavirus? That's just a very simple question that, as far as I can tell, no mainstream media outlet has asked. Were they studying it? Was the virus there? China doesn't want anyone to answer that question. It seems to me, given the massive loss of human life and the trillions of dollars that have been destroyed, that the entire world has an interest in knowing, was the Chinese government responsible, albeit inadvertently, for the beginnings of this outbreak that has caused so much devastation?
Do you think we'll ever know the answer to that?
I do. I do. I think the Chinese government will fight tooth and nail against it, but I'll tell you, I am going to press till we get an answer to that. And it's, look, from their end, it's a propaganda war. You've got the Chinese government threatening, number one, accusing the U.S. military of bringing the virus to China, which is laughably absurd, but it's also typical communist propaganda. Go on the offense and blame your adversary for whatever you've done. But number two, I will say one of the real benefits of this crisis, it has highlighted a whole lot of people on the vulnerability that America has to so much of our supply chain going over to China. You look at, for example, essential medicines and pharmaceuticals, where you've got the majority of the supply chain being manufactured in China, and we've seen China now threatening, if the United States crosses us, we'll just cut off their essential medicines. Michael, that is completely unacceptable. We should not allow China to have that degree of control over whether Americans live or die, and that's going to be one of the major discussions after this crisis, is we need to bring essential life-saving production out of China and back to America.
You attended the White House Energy Roundtable on Friday, and I know you have been hardcore pushing for some help for the energy industry. I went back and looked, Senator, at the price of a barrel of oil. $26 is what it closed at yesterday. February 20th, it was $53. 10 years ago, it was $111. When this coronavirus is over, we're sitting on a problem in the state you represent that's going to be a real problem. And I know you're working on that. What do you have to say about that?
Look, Texas is right now facing three disasters simultaneously. The country's facing two, and Texas is facing three. We've got, number one, a public health disaster from the coronavirus pandemic, and this is serious, and we're obviously taking extraordinary steps to try to flatten the curve and slow the spread of the disease. Number two, and this is all across the country, we're facing an economic disaster, and that is the disaster that is caused by the government steps to stop the health pandemic, the forced shutdown that we're seeing all across the country as people are staying home, and we've seen over 10 million people lose their jobs in the last 2 weeks. We're seeing small businesses being devastated, and it is, as an economic challenge, unlike anything you and I have ever seen in our lifetimes, and that is an enormous challenge. But in Texas, we've got a third piece, which is simultaneously energy and oil prices have collapsed, and part of the reason for that is that Saudi Arabia and Russia decided, right as the coronavirus crisis was beginning to expand, that they were going to use this as an opportunity to try to destroy the U.S. shale industry and to bankrupt every Texas producer, and so to take advantage of the crisis. And so they announced that they were going to flood the market and drive down prices, and we saw prices plummet. We saw prices go as low as $20, and there are a lot of analysts thinking that it may go as far as $10 oil or lower. That is right now wreaking devastation in oil and gas. I've spent the last 2 weeks, I've probably spoken with 50 CEOs and business leaders of energy companies throughout Texas who are just getting killed. And listen, you know, I grew up in Houston. I was here in '86 when oil dropped to $7 a barrel, and my parents, you know, my dad, my mom, they were in oil and gas. They owned a small business, a services company, a seismic data processing company. And in '86, when oil collapsed, my parents went bankrupt. They shut down the business. We lost the business. We lost our home. I moved out of my home. Well, I was in high school at the time. We lost the business. We lost our home. We lost everything. And that happened throughout the city of Houston. I mean, there were brand new glass skyscrapers downtown that practically had tumbleweeds blowing down the aisles, the hallways. we're right now on a very, very dangerous path, and Texas is going to be hurting badly. And just 3 months ago, energy was surging and Texas was doing great. But this combination is really dangerous, and so I'm spending an enormous amount of time. And the meeting Friday, the reason I flew to D.C. and went to the White House to be with the president was to be part of the discussion with the energy leaders about how we prevent the wholesale destruction of the energy sector in Texas and in the United States.
Senator Ted Cruz, a pleasure as always. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend.